Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Since our program's YouTube channel got suspended for a week by YouTube because we discussed the science of masks and mask wearing, we didn't just repeat the state/big tech sponsor propaganda. I say let's double down and see if we can get the whole station's YouTube channel suspended for a week.
Because you can still see us on AM 560, The Answer YouTube, but the Chicago's Morning Answer YouTube channel has been suspended for a week. Complete censorship, I think.
Well, let's go.
I mean, it's beyond that. This is again. We knew this was going to happen.
Well, let's go for two. Let's play two. In the immortal words of Ernie Banks, and talk about the price that was paid by young and old alike for the lockdowns and the other responses to the pandemic. Very interesting piece. A way to quantify this rather than just sort of feel it out. Charles Hooper and David Henderson write in the Wall Street Journal. Henderson is a research fellow at the Hoover Institution, and he was a senior health economist with Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors. Hooper is the president of a firm that consults with pharma clients. It's interesting what they did. They looked at young and old alike. The benefits of protecting the old and vulnerable exceed the costs. The costs of protecting the young and healthy have exceeded the benefits. And when they say protecting, they mean voluntary as well as coercive precautions. So mask wearing, washing, quarantining, distancing, isolation of infected people, the whole gamut. Benefits of protecting the old and the vulnerable exceeded the costs. Costs of protecting the young and healthy exceeded the benefits. Let's put some numbers to it. They took an 18-year-old and an 85-year-old. If the 18-year-old dies, he loses 61.2 years of expected life. That's a lot. But the probability of the 18-year-old dying, if infected, is tiny, about 4/1000%. So the expected years of life lost are only that times 35% because of the reduction in risk, times 61.2 years, which is 9/10,000ths of a year. That's only 7.5 hours. Everything this younger person has been through over the past year was to prevent, on average, the loss of 7.5 hours of his life. Now consider the 85-year-old. If he dies, he will lose 6.5 years of expected life, the probability of dying. If infected, it is much higher for him, about 8%. So the expected years of life lost are 8% times 35% times 6.4 years, which is 0.179th of a year, 65 days. The benefit of protection measured in life expectancy, 210 times higher for the 85-year-old as compared to the 18-year-old. 265 days versus 7.5 hours. What does that translate into? There was a study done by the OECD to estimate loss of lifetime income for students that was estimated to be 6%. Given U.S. median lifetime earnings of $1.7 million, that 6% translates into $102,000 per student. And of course, that loss is almost exclusively felt by the young, not the 18-year-old, not the 85-year-old. So the question, would you pay $102,000 to live an extra 7.5 years? What 18-year-old values his time at $13,600 an hour? The costs for the 85-year-old are close to zero. Person probably retired, and the benefit is 65 days. Now, the authors point out, of course, there are other benefits to both groups, and different risk portfolio, different risk tolerances, and so forth. But it is a way to sort of get some sense of proportion here. What is the most likely scenario, and what are we doing in terms of providing benefit versus what are we imposing in terms of cost? And think of the cost that we've imposed on 18-year-olds, and this doesn't even get into sort of the psychological and other aspects of these lockdown policies that, as we've heard from many mental health professionals, may have quite the long tail, particularly for those that are pre-adolescent. The 85-year-old versus the 18-year-old, that sort of drill out, I think, is very helpful. For more on this topic, as well as a discussion of a favorite topic in Chicago, the outfit, Bill O'Reilly joins us. Bill O'Reilly, of course, was the iconic anchor of the O'Reilly Factor, and he is at BillO'Reilly.com now, followed by millions all over the world. His No Spin News is broadcast weekday nights, 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on the First TV, which is a new media network available across digital platforms, including Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, many others. And his O'Reilly Update is heard weekdays on more than 225 radio stations across the country and streamed on the Pandora app. And, of course, everyone is familiar with his Killing series, his new installment in that series, Killing the Mob, the fight against organized crime in America. Bill, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me in, guys. How are you?
Good. So we'll get to the book in just a minute, but just your sort of global perspective on the last year of COVID policy.
Well, I think the contagion is vicious and has to be confronted by the governments. And whenever you have that circumstance, whenever governments have to confront anything, you're going to have massive screw-ups. I'm a historian, and sometimes things work out in the end, but it's always a botch. Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I and II. I mean, it's very, very hard for a huge bureaucracy to do anything effectively. So that's what you're seeing all around the world. And, to me, I tell my listeners and viewers, look, the thing is real. You could get it if you don't get vaxxed. I got vaxxed to protect myself, but also to protect others and to care for others who, in my family, got COVID. If I didn't have the vax, I couldn't have cared for them. So I think it's a common sense personal approach. I wouldn't depend on the government for anything. And then you get into the area of, well, how do I make a living if I own a restaurant and the government shuts down indoor dining? And that is a very, very terrible problem. So I spent some time in Florida looking at how Governor DeSantis, who I think will emerge from COVID as the most powerful politician, how they handled it down there. And they were the most common sense. That's what they brought to it. They said, look, we're not going to knock it all out, but we can't, as you just pointed out, hurt the majority of our people down here with draconian measures. We have to have some kind of balance, which they did, and then Florida came out ahead.
Did you focus on any schools at all, on the reopening of schools and sports down there?
Well, in my own life, I send my kids to private school because I don't like the public school system in New York, and in particular, that's where I am. And the private schools didn't shut down here at all.
That's great.
And, yeah, I mean, it was like they had to wear the mask. The urchins had to wear the masks. They had to distance. There were a few casualties as far as kids getting it, but not that many. Certainly not enough to shut the schools down. And the irony of this is that the poorer kids, the kids with bad and derelict parents, of which there are legion, they didn't do anything at home. They didn't have the computer systems. There was nobody watching them. And so they got hosed big time. And they're going to be set back 1-2 years.
And are still being hosed. Yeah, I mean, in New York and Chicago, still being hosed.
Chicago is a really good example of a city that is basically segmented between responsible and irresponsible. And that the government there, for decades, has not confronted the irresponsible. I think you guys would both agree with that statement.
No question.
Yeah.
No question.
Okay.
100%.
So I wrote a book called Killing the Mob, and it's an overview of organized crime. Part of the view, and this is why Chicagoans should read the book, the mob now is a lot different than it was in its heyday in the 1950s, early 1960s. They basically franchise out now. So the Italian gangsters, the mafia, all right, and you had a big guy in your town who was very, very powerful. They now retail it out. So the drugs, for example, which is, I'd say, 70% of all revenue for organized crime, they say to the neighborhood gangs, you can sell, but you got to pay us tribute a lot, and we'll let you sell on the street because the organized crime doesn't want to do that anymore. Well, that's what's causing all the murders in the poor neighborhoods of Chicago. These drug gangs, all right, fighting for turf or whatever they're for, and then innocent people are caught in the crossfire. Well, you're never going to get the politicians to confront that. They're not going to do that. And so, it's a frustrating thing because they don't put it out for what it is. I mean, it's not like Chicagoans are running around killing everybody. It's the gangs that are doing it, and they're selling narcotics. But Lightfoot's not going to say that, and Emanuel didn't say that. They just cover up the truth. And so the city of Chicago's got this big black mark on it, like everybody, well, I'm going to go to Chicago, I'm going to get shot. You're not going to get shot unless you go to those drug neighborhoods that are deprived and have been for centuries. So
Right.
it's really almost depressing. And my job is to tell the truth, which I do on my programs and in my books.
Well, with respect to your latest, Killing the Mob, as you were talking about, how much of the government horning in on the mob's action, legalizing some of the rackets, gambling, drug legalization in New York City, maybe prostitution legalization in the not too distant future, how much has that changed the landscape?
Not at all. It hasn't changed it at all because the organized crime families, all right, the people that run the rackets, they call them, Vice, the legalization of pot is not going to do anything to them because the pot costs a lot more when you walk into the store and buy it than on the street. And so their business isn't going to go down. And on hard drugs, in Oregon, they legalize hard drugs. You want to carry heroin and fentanyl around in your pocket, you can do that in Oregon. But that's not going to mean anything to the organized crime people out in Oregon because you got to get that drug in here. All right, and that's what they do. They forge an alliance with the Mexican cartels. Cartels smuggle it in. Organized crime takes it over, distributes it to the drug gangs, and that's how the addicts get it, and that's why you have a big opioid crisis. But again, the government's not going to tell you that. The reason that the mob was able to become the most powerful entity in the United States from 1946 to 1962 was because the federal government, in the form of the FBI, wouldn't investigate them. Nobody investigated organized crime from 1946 to 1962.
Why not?
And because they had stuff on J. Edgar Hoover. The mob had stuff on him.
So,
And Hoover wouldn't even acknowledge there was a mafia. When the mafia helped the United States invade Sicily. That's how they got so powerful. This is what the narrative that I have in Killing the Mob. I take it from John Dillinger, shot on the streets of Chicago, okay, in the 1930s, then to Al Capone, up Chicago again, then all the way up to today. And there's an arc. But for 16 years, there were no federal investigations into organized crime. Therefore, organized crime took over the movie industry, the rock and roll industry, the nightclub industry, built a city, Las Vegas, ran a country, Cuba, and nobody investigated them. And they amassed unbelievable power. But then Bobby Kennedy came in and changed everything.
Well, didn't it start even before that with the Kefauver Commission starting to look at organized crime?
That was more of a political thing than we're going to send you to the penitentiary thing.
Right.
Okay? So, yeah, they did TV things in the 50s, got enormous ratings. Everybody watched. But these guys just, I'm taking the fifth. It's like nobody got anywhere on it. It was only when Bobby Kennedy went in and used the power of the federal government to start to get indictments. And then they, after that, they passed the RICO law, and that really crippled organized crime. But they're still there, and they're still making a lot of money.
Yeah, I wanted to get your sense of just in the last 30 years, say, from Rudy Giuliani's prosecution of the five families under RICO, the effect that had and what the trajectory has been from that point, the 80s, until today. What is the footprint of the mob today?
Well, that caused the mob to change their way of business. So narcotics is the big thing. When you watch the movie The Godfather, it was true that a lot of the families didn't want to get into the drug industry because they knew that this was going to cause a lot of aggression toward them. But a guy, the mobsters finally said, well, there's so much money in this that we have to do it. And so now, as I said, 75% of the revenue that goes into organized crime is narcotics. Because vice, it's just not much. Shakedowns, all of this, I mean, they don't deal with that much anymore. They're in the unions big time. Mm-hmm. Organized crime still in the unions. In fact, I have a passage in my book on Donald Trump, the United States of Trump, where he tells me, the president actually said, look, if I wanted to get a building put up in New York City, I had to deal with the concrete union, which is run by the mob out of Staten Island. And I had them in my office, and I had to negotiate with them or I couldn't build a building. That happens today. So the footprint today is unions, narcotics, and then betting to some extent. Sports betting is a big revenue generator.
It's interesting you bring up Trump, too, and the unions in particular, and the continuing influence, because, of course, there's a passage in Frank Sheeran's book that was optioned into a movie a couple of years ago. I Heard You Paint Houses, talking about how the Biden campaign and Joe Biden's first Senate run went to him, he was a Teamsters official, and wanted the paper in Delaware to not be distributed in advance of the election. And Frank Sheeran said, we did Biden that favor, and we always had an audience with Joe Biden after that.
Well, I don't know anything particularly about Biden. I do know that Sheeran's book was not true.
Really?
And he wrote it because he was dying and he needed money, and he had to put in there, what he thought would sell, and the publisher wanted to hear. We have, I think, the best rundown of Jimmy Hoffa's death that has ever been put into print in Killing the Mob. I mean, it's a minute by minute, and we got it from the Hoffa family. So it's a very, I understand showbiz and publishing, and I know you got to say a lot of stuff, but if you read Killing the Mob, we back up every single thing. No anonymous sources, all the names are there. This is what happened. This is how we know it happened. And I write books that are very entertaining. The Killing series is the most successful nonfiction book series of all time.
And are you going to tell us where
copies.
Jimmy Hoffa's body is?
You got to read
read
Well,
the book.
they chopped them up.
Yeah.
And they chopped them up in Detroit, north of Detroit. So, when you get your body chopped up, you could be in a lot of places.
Yeah.
It's like that Johnny Cash song, One Piece at a Time. So it's kind of the same idea.
One of those.
Bill O'Reilly.
But
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
guys.
No, go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just saying, there's so many characters. I mean, there's just so many characters in the arc from Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger all the way to today. And you bring up Biden, and I brought up Trump. Everybody that is in public life, whether you're an entertainer, an actor, a politician, a sports person, the two Ali Liston fights were thrown by Liston. He took dives in both fights. I mean, everybody crossed paths with these people. They were just that powerful.
Really interesting. Bill O'Reilly, host of the No Spin News, weeknights 5 p.m. Chicago time at BillO'Reilly.com. And the new book in the Killing series, Killing the Mob, The Fight Against Organized Crime in America. Bill, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys, anytime. Thanks for having me in.
Thank
Bye.
you. It's a pleasure. He joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on...
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Can the daily recommended servings of fruits and vegetables fit into just 6 capsules? Yes. We start by sourcing organically grown whole fruits and vegetables. We ensure they are picked at peak ripeness. All of our produce is third-party tested for pesticides, heavy metals, bad bacteria, and nutrients. They are then washed, cut, and put through an advanced vacuum cold process which removes the water using pressure. This maximizes the nutritional value while preserving the color, smell, and taste of the fruit or vegetable. The freeze-dried food is then ground into a fine powder without adding any additives, fillers, or extracts. These powdered foods are then mixed in our proprietary blends and encapsulated, locking